not ready yet.
So we recently got the mid-season update for Season 4, and that means we have to try Pulverize Druid. And this build is incredibly fun to play now. And this version of a Pulverize Druid is going to be a little bit more focused on getting massive overpowers. Now, I currently am using 3 different uniques. Currently using Harlequin Crest, that's just incredibly strong. You can also use Godslayer Crown instead. Technically don't need either of those for the build to work, but obviously you're going to be much weaker. Same with the boots. We're using Wild Heart Hunger. You don't need these for the build to work, but you're going to be much weaker. And then a similar thing with our necklace, which is Banished Lord's Talisman. This one is a bit more integral to how we built this build, but if you're just starting off, you could still use a legendary necklace. Again, you just won't be near as strong. And that brings us to our skill tree, starting with Wind Shear. We're primarily using this just because it's a range generator, and upgrade 1 has a chance to make enemies vulnerable. We really don't need to use this until we're on bosses. Then we need to use it a little bit. Then we're going down with 5 points into Pulverize. Now, Pulverize itself got a massive damage buff. Specifically, I think a 76% increase to its damage. So Pulverize is just doing a lot more damage. Upgrade 1 makes your next Pulverize an overpower if you remain healthy for 12 seconds. And then upgrade 2, we're using the new changed upgrade, which is Pulverize deals 30% increased overpower damage, and enemies overpowered by Pulverize are stunned for 3 seconds. So this will be dealing massively increased overpower damage now. Then we're going down, we're taking Bloodhowl, which is just a big heal, reduces its cooldown by 1 second for every kill. And the main reason we're using this is upgrade 2, it generates 20 spirit at a base. Then we're going down 1 point into Poison Creeper. Upgrade 1 increases its effect, and upgrade 2 gives us increased critical strike chance to enemies strangled by it. Now, this is primarily so we poison enemies, but the 20% crit chance when we use it is also really good. Then we're going down, we're putting 1 into Trample, our main way to become unstoppable. Upgrade 1 makes it do more damage the less enemies it hits, and the primary reason we're taking this as well is because we get 40 spirit when we use it at a base. Then we're going down, we're taking the Petrify ultimate, stuns everything in range, makes them take increased critical strike damage, and then against bosses, it increases its duration, makes them take even more critical strike damage. Upgrade 1 generates spirit if we need that, and increases the duration of its effects. Then upgrade 2, when we kill enemies affected by Petrify, it reduces the cooldown, and when hitting a boss, it reduces the cooldown. Then we're going into our passives, 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses, so your core skills cost more but deal more damage. 1 into Predatory Instinct to get 3 into Iron Fur, so we take reduced damage while in Werebear in 3 seconds after. Then 3 into Touch of Fortitude for increased resistances, and 3 into Vigilance, so we gain damage reduction after using our Bloodhowl, and our Bloodhowl will be up quite a lot. Then we're going down, we're putting 1 into Mending. This has been changed. This now increases your max life while in Werebear as well, but we're primarily going into this for Provocation, which was buffed as well. While you remain in Werebear form for at least 12 seconds, your next non-defensive skill will overpower. We're going to be in Werebear most of the time because we're just spamming Pulverizes, which is a Werebear skill. Then 1 into Crushing Earth. Your skills do more damage to CC'd enemies. To get 3 into Stone Guard. When you have Fortify for over 50% of your max life, your skills deal increased damage. Then 1 into Safeguard. Critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for 3% of your max life. This is our main way that we're going to be fortified, and you're fortified basically 100% all the time. Then 1 into Neurotoxin to get 3 into Envenom. You deal increased critical strike damage against poison enemies. This is also a reason why we're taking Poison Creeper. Then we're putting 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal increased damage to elites. This works on bosses as well, which is one of the main reasons I put more points into this. And 3 into Circle of Life. Nature skills that consume spirit heal you for 3% of your max life. Every Pulverize heals us. Then 3 into Quick Shift. This is also massively buffed. When shapeshifting into a new animal form, you deal 3% increased damage up to 24%. So it's a massive damage increase, and we'll constantly be shapeshifting back and forth. We use our Bloodhowl, turns us into a werewolf. Then we Pulverize, changes us back into bear. That's 2 stacks. We use Poison Creeper, it takes us out of our forms. Then we Pulverize again, takes us back into bear. So we'll just be transforming back and forth. You want to keep an eye on this to keep it stacked. And then for our capstone, we're using Urzine Strength. Gain 20% increased max life while in Werebear in 3 seconds after, so 100% of the time. While healthy, we'll deal 30% increased damage and 30% increased overpower damage. So massive damage buffs and massive survivability buffs. And next up, we have our Spirit Boons, Wariness to take reduced damage from elites. elites, Iron Feather, which was now buffed. It's a 20% increased max life, which is massive. And then we're using Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. Now, Sight Talents was also doubled. It's now 10% increased crit chance. So if you're lower geared, you don't have as good a gear with as much master working on it, you may want to go into more crit chance instead. Then once you get higher crit chance, you can change over to Avian Wraith. Then we're using Pack Leader, which is a lucky hit so we can reset our Poison Creeper. You could also go into Calamity to extend the duration of Petrify, but I think Pack Leader is going to be better. And then finally, we have Obsidian Slam that was also massively buffed. Now it's every 10 kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. So incredibly good on anything besides bosses. And I think this was half. I think it used to be 20 kills. So this is incredibly strong now as well. And that brings us to our Paragon boards. And like always, I'm primarily going to be going over the board and glyph selection. There'll be a build planner in the description if you want to follow point by point. And this version of my Paragon boards is kind of a base version that you see in a lot of other pulverized builds. But I do think as I continue to gear up and play with all the new changes, I think my boards will change a bit. But starting off, we have the Spirit Glyph. So we gain increased critical strike damage, and critical strikes increase the damage enemies take from us. So just some pretty big damage increases. And the first board we're taking is Inner Beast. After shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 5% for 10 seconds, up to 45%. If you reach 10 stacks, this bonus resets and reduces the cooldown of your ultimate by 5 seconds, so we can petrify up more, and this just reduces our spirit cost by quite a lot. The glyph we're taking is Dominate, increase overpower damage, and when you overpower an enemy, all the damage they take from you is increased by quite a lot for 5 seconds. Then, going over to the right, we're taking Earthern Devastation. Your Earth skills deal increased critical strike damage that is increased by your damage versus crowd control up to 40% multiplicative damage, so we're at cap. And as you get better and better geared with higher upgrades, you should really only need 1 or 2 damage to crowd control on your pieces of gear to max this out. The glyph we're taking is Fang and Claw. There's a bonus to all magic nodes, and while in Werebear or Werewolf, close enemies take increased damage from you, and we'll also be getting some more resistances and Earth critical strike damage. This is also one of the ones I may be switching up at least its position, because I think there are some ways that I can more optimally get resistances. Then next, we're going up, and we're taking the Ancestral Guidance board. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. This will be out majority of the time. The glyph we're taking is Outmatch, so a bonus to rare nodes within range, and then you deal increased physical damage to non-elites and bosses. This will give us some core skills, some more resistances, and then some additional stat increases. Then we're going back down, going over to the right, taking the Constricting Tendrils board, but we're not taking the node itself. And then we're taking Earth and Sky, another bonus to all magic nodes within range, and then nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. This will give us some magic damage and some increase to max life, which is actually incredibly strong. Then finally, we're going up, we're taking the Survival Instincts board. While in werewolf form, you deal increased damage up to 50% for every 1% difference in current life between you and the enemy. So if you're 100% and an enemy's 50%, you're just getting big damage increases. Then the final glyph we're taking is Tectonic. This will give us Earth critical strike damage, then an increase to our lucky hit chance by 20%. We have a good handful of lucky hit effects, so this will just buff all of those. That brings us to our gear. In our weapon, we're going to want overpowered damage for the gems. In your gear, you're going to want max life. And then in your jewelry, you're going to want whatever is going to cap your resistances. And if your resistances are capped and you still need armor, you can put some skull gems in for additional armor as well. But that brings us to our uniques. As I went over, we're using Harlequin Crest. This is going to be best in slot, 20% damage reduction, plus 4 rank to all skills, all really good. But if you don't have this, you can also use Godslayer Crown, which will give you a big damage boost and pull everything in the center, will be really good against bosses as well. And if you don't have that, you're much lower gear, just use a legendary with a defensive aspect on it. Then for our boots, we're using Wild Heart Hunger, which when you shapeshift into werewolf or werebear, gain Wild Heart for 5 seconds. This grants you up to 1.5% multiplicative increased damage every 2 seconds, and it stacks to 20 times. So we'll just be getting pretty big damage increases overall. Then for our necklace, we're using Banished Lord's Talisman. After you spend 275 of your primary resource, your next core skill is guaranteed to overpower, and your critical strikes that overpower deal up to 60% increased multiplicative damage. Now, I don't have the greatest roll on mine, but this necklace is really strong, and kind of what this build is focused around is overpowering and critting at the same time. This is why in some of the gameplay footage, you'll see me just literally one-shot everything on my screen. That's when you're critting and overpowering, and it's absolutely ridiculous. You just one-shot everything in front of you. Then for our legendary aspects on our weapon, the most important one, Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing up to 2% of its damage to targets in its path. So how this works is Pulverize is normally a small radius in front of you that deals its damage. Then we add in this big shockwave that is additional. So now our Pulverize still has a small AoE in front of you, but now the big shockwave. So if you're in correct range, you can hit targets targets with both your Pulverize and the Pulverize Shockwave. Then for our other offensive aspects, we have after hitting 15 enemies with your shapeshifting skills, your next Werebear skill will deal up to 55% increased multiplicative damage and stun the enemies, so more stun, more damage increases. Then I'm also using Blood Boiling. When your core skills overpower an enemy, you spawn 3 volatile blood drops. Collecting them deal some base physical damage. You will create a lot of these blood drops, and basically you just want to keep moving around as you use your skills to pick those up for extra damage. Actually deal some decent damage, but the primary reason I'm using this is every 20 seconds your next skill is guaranteed to overpower. So we'll have so many different ways to overpower. This puts us at, I think, 5 different ways to guarantee overpowers, and they don't all get used on the same thing. If you have 5 different ways to overpower currently on your character and they're all procced, you can spam out 5 pulverizes and it won't use all the overpowers on the first one. It'll only use one at a time. Now, this is definitely something that I've been toying around with because there's a bunch of aspects that can just give us big damage increases, but this build is a bit more focused on overpower, so I thought this would definitely fit in a little bit better for this version of a Pulverize build. Then for our last offensive aspect, Pulverize is now an Earth skill. After casting Pulverize, you create a small AoE on the ground. This is primarily so our Pulverize is an Earth skill to just get a ton of additional scaling. Then for our defensives, we have basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 7 seconds, and I definitely have to get better at using this in the build because when you're not on a boss, you don't actually use wind shear that much, but you probably want to use it to keep this buff up. And then on our legs, you have 20% increased crowd control duration, which we do crowd control a lot, especially stun, and while enemies are unstoppable, you deal massively increased damage to them. Now, as I understand it, PvE enemies being unstoppable is just after you CC them with something, they're now unstoppable for some amount of time, so then you'll be dealing increased damage to them. I'm not sure exactly how this works on bosses. I think it used to work one way and then it was changed in some way. This will give us pretty good damage increases on at least non-boss enemies. And also, if you want to see all of the best roles for affixes you're going to be looking for this build, those will be in the build planner as well. But that's the entirety of this overpower Pulverize build. It's incredibly fun to use. It's just so satisfying hitting those crit overpowers that delete your entire screen. And with the nerfs to the pit and with the buffs to this build can get you to over level 100 pit runs. If you're somebody that wants to keep climbing the pit with builds that aren't S tier, this may be a good build for you. Personally, I just want to get builds to like 90 to 100 now to be able to efficiently farm for the masterworking materials, and this build can definitely do that. It's also incredibly tanky, but that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
I must wait a moment. I must wait a moment. I must wait a moment. I'm not ready yet. 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 I must wait a moment. 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 I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I do not have enough spirit. I must wait a moment. I'm not ready yet.